The common wisdom coming out of World War I was this model where you treat folks as close to the front, so proximity. If you get folks, the wisdom held and the data that they put forward held, if you got folks too far away from the front, their tendency to want to avoid going back to combat would override any treatment efforts you made. And remember, military psychiatry, military mental health isn't there in a curative way, they're in a way to restore them to fighting form, which is a very different mission and a very different function. It's for keeping your fighting force as great as you can, so people who aren't otherwise physically wounded should be able to go back and fight according to this model. So you treat them close to the front. Don't let them get so far away as to develop this need to want to avoid, where they feel so safe now that they don't want to go back. The next piece is immediacy. You treat them right away. So you get them someplace they can rest, because a lot of what was felt at the time, and some people still believe, has to do with a certain level of exhaustion that's associated with being in a combat zone. So you treat them close, you treat them immediately, and throughout their treatment, the soldier is given a high expectation that the reason they're there is to get ready to go back to battle. And that's the E, the PIES model: proximity, immediacy, and expectation. Freud wrote an interesting article where he used a phrase, I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't quote it, where he said that the military psychiatrist at the time had the job of having the machine gun driving the troops back to the front, whereas the enemy had the machine gun driving them away from the front. And that kind of always stuck with me, even before I entered the military myself. A lot of people thought, and I think probably it's fair to say that many people still do, that part of what soldiers and people in combat deal with is an internal conflict, something that has happened that has either put them so greatly at odds with their own values or has been so traumatizing that they have to hold it in, they have to repress it. And it's kind of a hydraulic model. This pressure builds up that can kind of result in all kinds of psychiatric problems. And the one model holds that you need to help them, like steam out of a kettle, get those feelings out, get those memories out, talk about it. And so hypnosis, having folks relive the event to talk about it, and for people who are having a hard time even thinking about it, in World War II they even began to use sedating medications like sodium pentothal, which I read in one article, the troops called them Blue 88s, which an 88 millimeter was one of the German guns that was just devastating. It would knock people out all over the place. And they would give them these pills and then get them just somnolent enough where their protective defenses they used to kind of hold these memories in check were gone, and then they would take them straight to these memories. Some of the data suggests they had very high return to duty rates. They could get people treated within a few days, give them a rifle, get them back to the front. But some of the data also suggests they had incredibly high suicide rates. There's controversy, about what it is we do. Does it make sense? The role of the military mental health professional is always going to have that dynamic tension between keeping a fit fighting force, keeping people in the saddle, versus, hey, we've identified this psychiatric casualty, we need to care for them and get them out. The conversations about the enduring effects of stress begin relatively early, even with the French, who were the first to deploy psychiatry to the field during World War I. And a lot of these, they were pulling civilian psychiatrists in large numbers, looked at this as like a form of exhaustion that may not turn off. And certainly they were beginning to believe, as they pulled soldiers out of the field, their soldiers fell apart on the field and were developing, in the language of the day, neuroses and hysteria, that they weren't necessarily getting better when they got away from the front, and that many of these problems persisted, and they began to ask questions about, does this enduring stress level that seems to make a soldier functional and optimally functional, does it have a long-term cost? The ideas of battle fatigue, that kind of, you exhaust somebody to a point where there's a tipping point, echoes the thinking at the time. And even now that we have a much, deeper understanding because of the technology we have of, kind of the human neurobiological functioning, they're asking the same question. When you challenge the autonomic nervous system, that extensively and that long, does it change the system itself? And there's actually some data going back to looking at Vietnam vets who have had chronic PTSD symptoms, and some of the structures involved, hypothalamus, for example, appear to change in volume and shape. I mean, literally, the wiring appears to change when that system is turned on too long. You begin to think, I think the longer you do this, about what are the long-term costs. It's hard to have a very, very, very troubled soldier walk out of your office and not ask yourself, I wonder if he will ever find a life as rewarding as he had or as rich, when right now he seems so anxious or enraged or sad or depressed. I mean, you hope they do, and you hope that the work you're doing is going to help them get there. But it's hard not to ask that question. One of the maybe unique challenges to being a mental health provider in the military has to do with a question I think probably all of us ask ourselves at some point, in terms of should I have sent this soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine back to their unit? Or should I have worked harder to get them evacuated from the theater? And we have these competing missions that sometimes are not compatible. And if there's this little voice, so the first mission is, I'm here to help maintain the fitness of the fighting force, to keep troop strength as high as we can to minimize psychiatric casualties and evacuations. Because once that person has been evacuated from a unit, getting a replacement is very difficult. And so better to keep them fit and resilient. And now they're starting to think more broadly, as resilient as we can, so maybe the next deployment 2 years from now, they'll be in better shape too. But if part of what I have some control over is whether or not I recommend evacuation versus sending them back, and subsequently after sending someone back, they either get killed, badly injured, or B, suffer an even more extensive psychiatric injury, which is not going to be remediated by brief intervention, and that the person may never truly reconcile in their lifetime. I mean, generally speaking, we go and we're trying to help people. We're trying to mitigate the costs of war on our warriors and to help with the mission. But sometimes we come out feeling pretty ambivalent about what just happened, or pretty ambivalent about a call we made. Yeah, it's in times of extreme stress and danger, people want a way out. Yeah. At a very basic level, right? And you feel that draw. However, you also feel you don't want to leave these people, right? You also feel, this sense that it would be great to have this sense of relief for all of us to be gone. I want this to be over, and I have literally while deployed seen people over the course of 30 or 40 minutes cover, go back and forth and just, when it became clear that one of the things I was considering as the person treating them was evacuation, is they would immediately begin having remorse that they ever came and saw me, immediately feel a sense of relief like this might be over, immediately begin to feel like they had let their buddies down. And all that's the very personal experience of the soldier. The commander, what the commander knows is that statistically he's been taught in his training that if one evacuates, you're likely to lose more. Your ability to do your mission is going to be compromised, and you have to do your mission.